Hi, welcome back to AI for Good. My name is Juan, and I am part of the International Telecommunication Union, or the ITU, the United Nations specialized agency dedicated to information and communication technologies. ITU is also the organizer of the AI for Good Global Summit, the United Nations leading platform to have an action oriented, global, and inclusive dialogue on how AI can help us accelerate our progress to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. AI for Good is co organized by ITU and the X Prize Foundation in partnership with the ACM, the 38 UN sister agencies who are part of this initiative, and co-convened with Switzerland. Now, I want to talk a little bit about AI for Good Let's Talk since we haven't done this in like 3 months. AI for Good Let's Talk is our program to discuss to have a human-centric discussion at the intersection of AI, the human experience, and our quest to build a better world. Just to let you know that this conversation is live. All of this is coming like right now. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to ask them on any of the social media channels that you're seeing this on. My Padawan, my great colleague Melissa, is taking a look and checking out the feeds just to make sure that your questions are included in part of our dialogue. So why don't we say hi to Melissa? Hi, Melissa.
Hey,
Hey, long time no see, which is like probably 2 seconds ago. Yeah, it's good to see you. Anything you got to say to everyone?
just that I'm really excited to see what kind of questions people come up with.
Okay, wonderful. So today's AI for Good Let's Talk is a really cool one. We have invited Martin Jebens from the ICRC to talk a little bit about how drones, thermal sensing, and AI can identify abandoned weapons in active and past conflict zones. Martin Jebens is a consultant working for the Weapon Contamination Unit at the ICRC, leading an R&D project to assess how airborne remote sensing and AI can improve the capability of detecting these weapons after war and conflict. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Martin. Hi, how's it going?
Hi.
Hi.
Doing great. Doing great. What about you two?
Oh, the weather is nice. Can't complain. So, yeah.
Perfect.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you. And looking forward to this talk, and I appreciate that I was given the opportunity. So thank you already. Yeah, as you said, I'm Martin Jebens. I work as a consultant at the ICRC Weapon Contamination Unit, where we do a project on thermal sensing, airborne thermal sensing, and AI. My background is, as mentioned, in disaster risk management and as a geologist as well. So I have a couple of masters. I have one in hard rock geology and I have one in disaster risk management. And prior work have been on quite diverse, going from mineral exploration into flood risk management and into mine action. And now I'm back to mine action and weapon contamination again. So that's part of my background.
That's fantastic. And I know you had some slides you wanted to share really briefly, just to give context in the conversation about the work you're doing.
Exactly. And I will start with those. So I will just share my screen and then go into the slides here. But step back. Yeah. So the background for the project is back in 2018, actually, when the ICRC made an agreement with the Waseda University in Tokyo on developing and look into new technologies that can improve how we cope with the challenges in humanitarian action. And the first project is actually this one. So we began back in 2019 to have a look at how drones and thermal sensing and AI together can fit into, can improve how we detect weapons in the field in order to, of course, release land as fast as possible so that people can return home to a safe and secure, more safe and secure environment at least. And maybe nothing is happening now, is it? Okay, we do like this. Oh, only one slide now.
No.
No worries. So I know we do know the context of the slides, so maybe we can bring them up later.
Yeah, sure.
But I think one of the things I remember from the work that you're doing is the big challenge. The big challenge you have. You're using a lot of drone technology that's pretty much off the shelf, right? Same with the cameras as well. And does that impact the type of data that you're getting, or the type of work that you need to do in order to do with landmine detection?
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, of course, there was a few preconditions to the project. One of them being that it should be a sustainable project, a sustainable equipment we use, including that it needs to be easy to repair in the field. So we use an off-the-shelf drone, a Phantom 4 professional drone, and we use an off-the-shelf thermal camera, which is a FLIR ProView, and put these two together. This also means that, of course, that it will be rather inexpensive equipment. I would say you can probably purchase a drone for less than $1,000. The camera is around 4,000 maybe, and putting those two together actually seems to be working quite well. So the data we get out of it is, of course, in need of different types of post-processing. And this is something what Baseda has been helping us with. So the principal idea of the project was to identify some innovation solutions in the field of detection and clearance of weapons, because we wanted to better understand if these technologies and the developments of these technologies could contribute to improve the operations in the sector. But not only focusing actually on the mine action and weapon contamination sector, but also identifying if thermal sensing and specifically, or maybe also remote sensing, how can we use that in a broader humanitarian work? So basically, what we have been trying to assess is to what extent could the development of this airborne thermal imaging system contribute to fasten the pace of detection and disposal of mines and explosives, remnants of war.
Yeah.
So I mean, and where I see, I mean, besides, of course, that many of these remote sensing techniques, including the thermal sensing, the cameras becomes better and better. The resolution gets higher and higher, so you can actually purchase a really good camera now for not that much money. So that is, of course, driving the process of the project. But where I see one of the main advantages is in the deep learning or in the artificial intelligence, because it will help us increase the probability of detection at the same time lower the false alarm rate.
Yeah.
And this is a key element in a rather costly mine action sector. It takes a long time to clear an area, because you get a lot of false alarms rates. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. And I think I know we had this conversation before the actual chat today. One of the things that's really interesting about this space is how you're dealing with a lot of the conditions that you have to work with, especially during the pandemic, right? You're normally, a lot of this work needs to be done in either active conflict zones or test beds where you can emulate conflict zones. So I was kind of curious how that's been working out for you, since we have to stay at home or relatively within our region. So
yeah, so that's been a challenge to say the least. So I mean, we did together with the Waseda University, we did a proof of concept back in the late 2019, and we realized that the thermal camera is working very well. I mean, for some points it exceeded our expectations. So the idea was, of course, for 2020 that we should go out and test it in the field, which certainly became pretty impossible. So I had to build my own test field in Denmark, in which I it's very low practical this, but bought different types of sand and soils, had an area laid out. Some places would be high grass, some places would be just the soil. It could be dirt, it could be a sand-rich soil, it could be like a more glacial, like different sizes of stones or rocks in it. And then I started testing on different times of the day in different weather conditions. Can I actually detect buried landmines in different soils? and how good are we also at detecting on the surface weapons.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, tried different types of objects. We have so I used to work on a huge demining project in Denmark on the Danish west coast, from which I had some old mines which I've been using. The German stock mine, which you apparently you also find in large numbers still in northern Africa. So it was quite an appropriate target. And then I have been able to borrow a few mines and from the Danish mining group as well. So it's trying to collaborate also at home now that we can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And for this year, of course, we're still trying to get out of the country, but now I'm found a few ICRC delegations who might be interested in testing the equipment for me, so I can just ship it off to them. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic, because I know one of the challenges and opportunities here is the ability for us as a community to scale international collaboration, especially in projects such as with this type of importance, right? I think, Melissa, you did have a question a little bit about data and how, what are the challenges around that, right? So
So it was something Juan and I had spoken about before as well, which was what are the kind of external factors that could affect the collection of data using the drone, infrared, and AI method. For example, are there any laws that might prohibit you from flying drones in certain areas, which could then stop you from collecting the information you need?
Yeah, if we start with the legislation, that's quite interesting as well, because every country seems to have their own legislation on how to use drones. In some countries, it's very easy to fly it, like in Denmark. It's cheap as long as you don't fly over a city, so which I'm not doing anyway. Whereas in other countries, it's illegal to even bring the drone into the country, and that's why you need to get in contact with the national authorities also to agree on the setup of field tests or trials and the use of this equipment. So it takes a little bit of negotiation, but it seems like quite many national authorities in impacted countries are quite interested in trying out this method. Maybe also emphasizing that this is not the silver bullet. This is just another tool in the toolbox of clearance techniques we have in the world, or we use in the mine action sector.
Yeah.
So this will not be able to be used in any condition. And that is going back to your question on the environment, because the remote sensing, the thermal sensing is only measuring the heat emitted from the nearest objects, meaning that if you have a thick layer of vegetation, you will not be able to see through that vegetation very easily. Then it has to be like a grass vegetation, which easily moves, because then you sometimes get a glimpse of what's on the ground. So definitely issues with how much vegetation. So that is a key issue. Then you will have not too much wind, of course, because then the drone will not be stable in the air. It also seems that the detection is favored by direct sunlight. So the idea is, of course, that every object emits heat at a different rate, and that is what the camera picks up on. And it also have different heat capacities. So it's these small changes which we are trying to see with the thermal camera.
Right.
And then you can ask, how do we then detect buried objects? Because that's the part where we exceeded our expectations, is that we can actually detect subsurface objects. And the reason for that is that the mine, for instance, will have a different heat capacity than the surrounding soil. So the mine will either heat up or cool down the soil which it's placed in. So you don't see the mine itself actually, but you see the footprint of the mine. So you see a black or light shadow on the surface of the sand soil, for instance. So sun, wind, maybe water content. There's also something about the chemistry of the minerals in the soil, which differs a bit. So
yeah, so
yeah,
a lot of
so that's it.
factors.
I should be asking you like tips to help to revive my jade plant that's sitting right by my balcony right now. Just because it sounds like you're dealing with a lot of factors, just to make sure you have the right type of data with the right type of technology that can be deployed at scale, right, across all these different regions and different type of conditions. Not even thinking about legislature. And I was just curious because I know you brought up this point that it's really critical to bring in a lot of other kind of interdisciplinary perspectives in this type of work, because some of this work isn't new, right? Like I think thermal sensing in particular, I think we've done that across different type of work in archaeology, for example. And I was kind of curious what your experience is like working in this particular space and why you're passionate about it as well. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, I maybe it comes from my background in disaster risk management that it's seen many times that there's can be too much duplication of work. So that's also why I'm interested to bring in other sectors. And I mean, it's also creating this triangle between humanitarian sector, academia, and private sector. I find that very interesting because as a humanitarian sector, the main purpose is, of course, to save life and decrease the risk for people in need. And we don't really have probably right now the capacity to start up these big projects on AI, and also maybe have sometimes a little bit of struggling a little bit on handling big data. But I mean, the private sector is really investing billions in new startups and technologies who can handle huge amount of data and develop different AI algorithm for object detection or medical purposes. Or I mean, there's a lot of good cases coming out of it. Whereas the humanitarian organization maybe have more just begun exploiting the potential of AI. And then, of course, there's all the scientists and in the academia part, which I'm then working with in Waseda University. For the private sector, I'm currently working with the NEC, who's also interested in the part of thermal sensing and how we also can use satellite images. Maybe it does not necessarily have to be from a drone.
Yeah, it's true because I think. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, like, I think for urban tree map the urban tree heat index, if I remember correctly, I'm probably saying it wrong. They are using satellite imagery to determine kind of like the type of how much of greenery is in a certain urban area. So there's different approaches and technologies that can be used. I think one thing that's I think could be interesting, and I was curious about it from your perspective, is given the type of your work you're doing and your experience in disaster risk management. Be it natural or be it like artificial, like landmine weapon detection, where do you see some of the promising projects or innovations happening right now in that particular space? Or what would you like to try your hand on if you had the option that you think is more important, right? So.
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's whatever you set out to do, you need to like also look at it, have a risk-based approach to it, because we don't want to do more harm. And there could be a problem, for instance, using AI and remote sensing images, and especially true color images, because it might actually could be used to target population and cause more damage than good. Even though I think the things I'm working on now will definitely benefit the nature of, again, depending on the crisis, but it will potentially improve the risks people are in. Good question. I mean, I'm not really sure I'm answering your question here. So what I think is maybe what could be interesting to look a little bit more into is is actually using the AI, because I think we have a lot of data already out there. We keep asking probably for more more data. But sometimes I also, when I sit and look at the data, I realize that maybe it's because we don't really understand the data. If this makes sense. So, but what I would like to do, or where I see what could be interesting definitely to do is using the AI or the deep learning to analyze the data, because I think we might spend too much time on analyzing data instead of making decisions.
Right.
So if we can move away from analyzing data into decision making, I mean, by using AI, that would be for me quite interesting.
Right. Yeah, it is interesting because ultimately, when you think about technology, technology impacts human experience, and it does define a lot, especially when you talk about artificial intelligence. It's not just an existential, it's an existential impact, right? Like how does it augment our understanding of the world? And I think that's kind of where we have to define what does it mean to be AI for good in that particular context, especially in the type of work that you're doing in weapon contamination, especially the type of work that it's how this is being deployed in the field. And I know, Melissa, you had a question specifically about the particular project and how that could overlap with other different type of work.
Yeah,
right?
but before we get to that, we do have a question from one of our viewers.
Cool.
Who asks, how would you ensure that you have monitored an entire area? And do the drones take a specific flight path at specific altitudes?
The short answer is yes. I mean, there are a number of even free softwares, which has been another focus for the project, is trying to use free softwares. Yeah, so you can for many of, if you, depending on the drone again, of course, there are types of drones in which you can pre-program your flight, and that will be speeds, that will be flight height, and you often with these images also need quite a large overlap of images to be sure that you actually covered the entire area. And then of course it will be GPS positions, so you know precisely where it's been.
Yeah.
I would not use this technique because we in the mine action sector, you look into a non-technical survey in which you find out as much information as possible of the area which are contaminated. Then you make a technical survey in which you go in and clear the mines just to see if there are any, and if there are any, then you make the clearance. Okay. So I don't think these techniques are not for clearance, of course, because we will never be able to find everything. And again, we'll never be able to find everything in every environment. Yeah. But as a tool for this non-technical survey, it would be quite amazing because it will define a suspected hazardous area. And in the past, we have spent a lot of money on figuring out where the mines actually were, or which areas are mostly contaminated. So yeah. So of course it's important to know where it's been, but we can't, after it's flown over an area, be sure that everything is gone. So you will also need some kind of ground personnel. Yeah,
no, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And now on to my question that I had earlier. So from what you've said, everything sounds incredibly inspiring. But I guess I want to know what it is that excites you about implementing this application at scale, and if you do see other applications of AI in this field.
You dropped out a little bit. So other applications in humanitarian action in general, or?
Well, I suppose in post-conflict action.
Okay, yeah. No, I mean, because it's a lot what's going on the ground and monitoring changes on the ground. Basically, at the end of the day, it's object detection, right? So it's, would say it's just the same as a self-driven car would do. We just try to recognize the weapons in order to not find and clear a can of tomatoes instead. basically. So it's I mean, anything after we have, so changes on the ground. So what we have been thinking about is using it for forensic purposes. So often after a war and conflict, you will find, of course, dead bodies. You might go out and look for mass burial sites. And the idea behind this is, of course, that the reworked sediment might have another heat emission than the surrounding sediment. So you might be able to use the AI to look for certain patterns in this, I mean, on the soil surface. So this is a thought. We haven't tested it out. I can see sometimes you can see this reworked sediment for years. I mean, and also after you rework the sediment, it will tend to sink a bit. So you will have a very small, almost non-seeable identify. Yeah, it's very difficult to identify visually, but it's much easier to identify using some kind of remote sensing. And this is also one of the key areas for ICRC, of course.
Right.
But still remembering, also looking into the data security of whatever we do, which we also have a very good set of rules on as well. But
Right.
that is what I see could. I mean, basically, it's the same method. We just look for a bit of rework sediment.
Thank you. It's very interesting and definitely not something I would have.
Yeah. I totally agree. It's been an interesting conversation, and I know we're kind of running. We're kind of going to wrap up a little bit. But Martin, do you have any last words or thoughts that you want to share with kind of the rest of our AI for Good audience?
I don't know. Can you make a small commercial here? No, but if anyone's interested, we have a webinar in mid-April on AI and on remote sensing and AI in the mine action sector. So there, the discussion will continue.
Right. Yeah, and hopefully that discussion can continue here as well. We'd love to have.
I hope so. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, without further ado, I think we're going to say bye really quickly to Martin and talk a little bit about what's coming up next for AI for Good. So, Melissa, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's coming up next?
Sure. So first of all, thank you all for joining us for this week's Let's Talk. We've just launched our AI for Good YouTube channel, so be sure to subscribe for all the latest and historical content in this space. Thank you very much, and back to you, Juan.
Thanks, Melissa. So again, AI for Good is the action-oriented global and inclusive dialogue on AI to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It is the platform to kind of find all these different type of products. If you're interested in the type of work we're doing, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, we're on Instagram and LinkedIn. And if you're interested in the type of work that's being discussed here, again, you can check out Martin's webinar. We can also check out the focus group on AI for natural disaster risk management that's recently launched by ITU. And again, we look forward to seeing you in about 3 weeks for our next AI for Good Let's Talk, which will be about smart cities and smart mobility. Thanks so much again, and hope to see you soon. Bye.